key factor that's just not discussed behind all that exponential rise of all our modern diseases is what we're doing to our soil. So the importance of regenerative agriculture is just, you can't even state it. It's the best solution to our planetary and human health crisis.
As former President Franklin D. Roosevelt said, a nation that destroys its soil destroys itself. The forests purify the air and are the lungs of the land, giving fresh strength to our people. This documentary is by no means exhaustive. There's so many videos about Sabbath, so much about creation care, so much about regenerative farming. But I wanted to take a minute to really hone in on the fact that I believe God literally meant what he said when he made a covenant with the land. And I believe he purposely put some practices and rhythms in place so that we wouldn't abuse it. It will grow for our benefit. But there are often times when we use it and abuse it to a point where it can't sustain. It can't sustain itself. It can't produce health. And therefore we reap those negative consequences upon ourselves that we place upon the land. I'm going to propose that healing literally comes from the soil. That covenant is with the soil. We're going to take a really quick journey toward potential restoration of the environment. And we're going to talk about the trauma placed upon the soil. We're going to talk about Sabbath and rest. We're going to talk about what healing might look like in regeneration. The land is drying out. The dust and the topsoil are blowing away and not remaining because we've worked it and worked it and worked it. We talk about humans getting burned out. We're literally burning out the soil. We're working it to death. I believe neoliberalism has actually made the land our slave and not our partner. It's made something that we have forced it to go and go and go and go. Just like in neoliberalism, we have focused less on the community of people and more on the individual. And we've made the land a commodity and just forced efficiency and efficiency and efficiency out of it rather than treating it as a healthy partner.
Everything that's been done in agriculture for the last 80 years has been done for efficiency only. There's nothing wrong with efficiency. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's incumbent upon me as a businessman to operate efficiently. But when efficiency is all you're worried about, you pay the price in resilience. Because efficiency and resilience are like yin and yang. You give up one for the other.
Margaret Thatcher, the leader of the United Kingdom in the 80s, she said that there is no such thing as society, only individuals. A key destructive core value that is found in neoliberalism. There's a little connection here, I think. Mono-agriculture, to me, is individuals, right? Margaret Thatcher's thinking it's only about individuals. Don't think about the community. We're just a bunch of individuals. That's how we run our crops these days. But we know that in relationships with people, we are stronger together. We are more beneficial in covenant and relationship and community organizing together. Just like an ecosystem of multiple crops, as you can see in this garden, there are multiple vegetables being grown side by side which support one another. What we don't want is just base competition between individuals, which is what neoliberalism pushes forward. We want covenant. We need to get back to a healthy ecosystem of relationship.
There's a growing body of scientists around the world that are raising alarm bells right now, saying that there's only about 60 crops left on planet Earth. And what they're basically talking about is background soil erosion rates that are occurring. And so one statistic I read in one of Richard Heinberg's books, Peak Everything, mentioned that 1 ton of grain currently erodes 7 tons of topsoil. So we're basically trading topsoil for grain.
Now he does go on to say that there are healthy ways of raising grain in regenerative ways. You can do it. But the way that we're doing it, with pesticides and herbicides, monocropping with tons and tons and tons of chemicals that can remove the healthy nutrients and even moisture from the soil. We're killing the soil. We are working against the covenant and promise that God has made with us in the land. And honestly, I think it's killing us.
If you look at the modern human health diseases, in delayed fashion by about 10 or 15 years, they show exactly the same exponential rise. And we now know they are, most of the cause of that, if not all the cause, is related to the chemicals we're putting into our food and our body, like glyphosate, we know it gets in, and the stripping out of the healthy nutrients that our bodies need, replacing them with only a few simple man-made chemicals.
The land continues to be driven harder and harder and harder and harder. Much like Pharaoh did to our forefathers and sisters and brothers and mothers, the Hebrews who lived in Egypt many, many years ago. But God reminded these Hebrews who had worked so hard, He was changing their mindset and called them to Sabbath, to let the land rest.
The land can't wait for the people to be fulfilled, returned, so that it can have its rest. And I thought that was just precious. Like, we are working this sweet earth, the sweet land that God gave us, and sometimes often taking it so for granted that it needs its rest so it can continue to do what God created it to do for His creation, which is feed the insects and the animals and its people. So that is why I have chosen to give my land a rest. So anyway, I'm not necessarily doing it in the idea of it's a law. What I found when I studied that more and more, it was really about keeping greed out of the hearts of the landowners.
Rest truly counteracts our need for more and more and more that neoliberalism pushes forward. Growth, 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 growth. Resting assumes that God will provide. Resting believes that He will take care of you.
That we're only grazing a paddock or an area for a very short time. The second one is that we want to rest it for a very long time so that those plants can recover and any new plants, the seedlings and so on, can establish themselves before they're grazed again.
Resting allows its space and time to heal. I truly believe Sabbath for us is the same. When we rest and we abide, as Jesus said, we abide in Him in Sabbath, we in turn are able to receive and be refreshed by the grace and presence of God as children. Land and us both need rest for our rejuvenation and regeneration.
There's a lot of talk about regenerative agriculture. The word regenerative is all about renewal leading to greater health in a system. A farm, a paddock, a landscape is a complex adaptive system. A complex, healthy adaptive system has within it the solutions to any problem if it's been damaged or simplified.
He notes systems, but I would use either community or relational teams. Dr. Lee writes in his book called God and Community Organizing, the ultimate goal of God's organizing is shalom, which Martin Luther King Jr. called the beloved community, a just, loving, and reciprocal community where every life is respected and interrelated, which reflects the moral nature of the triune life. Covenant strives toward the perfected fellowship among the partners, shalom. It refers to the blissful reality where God's love, justice, and power finally actualized in the flourishing of all creatures. I truly believe that God's perfected, flourishing life can be found in this amazing soil.
Soil is a living, breathing system. Sometimes we have to feed it a little for it to feed us. And it's like a relationship. If you're in a relationship where all you do is take, and you take the maximum you can at every opportunity, what are the odds of that relationship lasting very long?
This is not a normal, human, selfish 21st century way of thinking. We need to reframe our view of ecosystems to understand the benefits of regenerative farming.
If you're going to become a really good regenerative farmer, it involves a whole worldview change of how landscapes and nature and the earth systems work. True shift to regenerative farmer is the mind and and hard process.
Sabbath was a complete shift away from Pharaoh's driving work. It really was a paradigm shift for people to realize that rest really was inherent in the relationship between their God, the people, and the land. And that resting could actually lead to more abundance. I bet most of today's secular regenerative farmers have no idea how close they are to this covenantal process of Sabbath and rest. But those who do know that this has been a plan from God from the beginning. Ellen Davis writes this in her book. It is within the context of covenant relationship that God considers and values, remembers the land. That biblical understanding may be correlated with a notion frequently evoked by Wendell Berry and others, namely of the membership of all creation. A membership of parts inextricably joined to each other, receiving significance and worth from each other and from the whole. The notion of membership implies the obligation also to remember, to work at healing the wounds inflicted on land by all its human inhabitants. So what would healing the land look like? What would the soil feel like? Let's find out.
It's a lot greener than it used to be, but I think when you walk on the soil, you feel it beneath your feet. When you walk now, it feels like you're walking on a sponge, whereas before it felt like a parking lot.
Jesus said that the greatest way to fulfill all the law is to love God and to love your neighbor. And if God made a covenant with us and the land, would I be going too far to suggest that the land is also our neighbor, also God's creation?
And when people say, well, what's the criteria? On our little bags there, we say healing the land one bite at a time. And basically if it's not healing, it's not good. If we just ask the question, does this heal? It would fundamentally change the amount of Coca-Cola we drink and the kind of entertainment we do. I mean, is there anything really healing about the Kardashians?
There's been trauma. There's been brokenness. There's been hurt placed upon our land and upon us too. But we're called to rest. We're commanded to rest. And that Sabbath rest is so healing. And the healing will come if we continue to care, for our creation and can care for our land. And the rhythm of rest and work is one with the Lord. It is so nurturing and revitalizing. I made a shirt to remind myself that it begins with rest. It begins with abiding. And we work from rest. This is an awesome quote from Catherine Schifferdecker, an Old Testament professor at Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. She says, "To this situation of restlessness and constant striving, the Sabbath commandment says enough. It's a word of law that addresses our insatiable appetite for finite resources. It is also a word of liberation for those caught in the endless cycle of acquiring more and more stuff. Sabbath holds up for our attention the value of a community, the value of everyone having enough, the value of trusting God to provide, the value of matter, both bodies and soil, and the value of rest. It is a word of grace to the culture obsessed with more. It is a word of grace to those who fall asleep to the glow of their screens and waking, reach for them before they attend to the needs of the day. Rest, true Sabbath rest, is a gift. A gift we need more perhaps than we know. A gift that our world most certainly needs." And I truly believe that if we begin to recapture these ideas of rest and work and abiding and covenant, we will see healing, not only of the soil, but of ourselves and our communities and our world, our environment. And truly it comes down to taking part in a loving, trusting, covenantal community, resting in the love of God. Thanks.